Aloha, I'm Paul Drews. Welcome to another edition of PTC TV, brought to you by PTC'13 Platinum sponsor Equinix. This is the fourth of 5 programs specially created for PTC'13. If you missed any of the previous programs, you can watch them online after the conference at ptc.org.
Hi, I'm PTC CEO Sharon Nakama. PTC'13 is coming to a close. I hope you have enjoyed the conference so far and that you have found the experience to be incredibly worthwhile. We have a series of very interesting keynotes and executive insight roundtables on Wednesday. You're also invited to the PTC'13 closing lunch and award ceremony. I look forward to seeing you there. Aloha.
Looking to pick up your registration badge and materials or register for PTC'13? Visit the PTC'13 registration booth located in the Coral Lounge on the 6th floor of the Mid-Pacific Conference Center at the Hilton Hawaiian Village Waikiki Beach Resort. The registration booth is open every day starting at 8 a.m. Please remember to bring a valid form of photo identification with you and claim your registration badge and materials.
Traffic has had some interesting impacts to the mobile ecosystem. First and foremost would be mobile network operators. For the longest time, mobile networks tended to be a single application network, and that was voice. This is very similar to the behavior we saw 14 years ago when public ISPs came together in our facilities in order to peer and localize the exchange of traffic with one another in order to make sure that the internet delivered a positive experience. We're now seeing the same thing from the mobile network operators. There's some interesting secondary effects to other members of the mobile ecosystem for very similar reasons. A good example would be social media platforms and advertising platforms that tend to co-locate next to one another in order to serve content as efficiently and quickly as possible. Another good example would be handset OEMs, who will tend to proxy things such as email and other types of popular content in order to make sure the end user has a positive experience.
Hello, welcome to PTC TV. My name is Tony Chan, Editor-at-Large at Communications Day, a newsletter based out of Sydney, Australia. Today with me is Mr. Andrew Kwok, who's the President of International and Carrier Business for Hutchison Global Communications, based out of Hong Kong. We're going to talk a little bit about wholesale. He's involved in the wholesale business. And I think HTC has a unique position because it's a fully integrated operator with both the retail and wholesale side. So, I'd like to start off by asking Andrew, what has been the impact of the retail business on your business in wholesale?
Okay, so firstly, thanks for the interview. Lovely Hawaii. Aloha.
Yes. Aloha.
Yes, recently, in the recent year, there is a lot of changes in the wholesale market, which affect both the retail and also the corporate business around the world. Okay, so having said that, a lot of people are saying that now wholesale, they have some turmoil or whatsoever. But as Chinese, okay, we have a word called 危机, is a risk and opportunity.
Okay.
So we see it is also happening in the wholesale arena, which is one part of our business. On the risk side, we see that still the bandwidth situation, the supply and the demand imbalance is still impacting the industry. But having said that, there is also a lot of other opportunity comes up. For example, mobile data is growing, the people need more eyeball. All this is actually introduce opportunity to the industry also.
Okay. Within the wholesale discussions that I've listened to during the show, OTT always comes up, over-the-top players. The discussion that they're having a free lunch and even with scoops of ice cream. And so what is your perspective on them?
Okay, so I think the OTT relationship and the situation is actually evolving. In the past, the people are talking about OTT is a so-called destructive kind of approach or whatsoever. I think going down the road, actually even nowadays, we don't think so. I think there are opportunities for us to cooperate with them. The reason behind is that in the traditional carrier, or even if it is a very creative or innovative carrier like ourselves, we see that there are 4 contributions that we can have. We can provide the customer, the user, a worldwide recognized identification through their, let's say, for example, mobile number. Okay, we can provide locational-based information, network development cooperation, and other than that, we can also provide them a payment gateway relationship. All these things is adding into the formula in a positive way.
Okay. Okay, bringing it back to PTC, what are some of the things that you're actually bringing to the market? I mean, what do you want people to know that you're selling here?
Okay, thanks. So as you mentioned, there's no free lunch. I'm not paid for this interview, so we have to advertise a little bit. just joking a little bit. I think we are adding value to the industry by bringing in the next generation of wholesale.
Okay.
IPX, a lot of people is talking about that, but actually it is for real. We are doing IPX and we are collecting traffic. Other than that, we also do see that another kind of cloud communication in which is more on a cooperative manner we can bring to the table. We are pushing the cloud. Other than that, we do have new generation of hubbing service. We call Blue City. So it is another generation of interconnection regime so that we can add value to the overall network.
Okay, okay. So what do you see going forward? I mean, what's on your agenda for this year?
For this year, we'll be focusing on both our so-called traditional business. We are expanding our footprint. As we mentioned in last year, we have already established our EMEA regional headquarters in London. Okay. Other than that, we have not stopped our venture into those developing countries.
Right.
So this is one piece. On the other side, for those products that we mentioned in the wholesale, we are going to give another push to it this year.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Kok.
My pleasure.
Thank you, and goodbye.
Would you like a quick and easy way to keep track of the conference program and schedule? Download the PTC'13 mobile app and favorite the sessions you'd like to attend. Learn about the PTC'13 sponsors and find out where the meeting suites are located. You can do all of this and more. Visit crwd.cc/PTC'13 on your mobile device or search for PTC'13 in the App Store. Time now for the day's first keynote panel discussion. Is the future of telcos mobile or untethered?
Okay, so thanks for showing up. We appreciate you being here. I was going to give a little shout out. I've been doing this for about 4 years, and I absolutely never until this year realized how much work actually goes into putting one of these things together. And I'll give you an example. There is this huge spreadsheet. It's actually an activity or a workflow chart, 100 and some odd pages, that sort of describes every time block on every day, beginning from several days before the conference until immediately afterwards. It tells where every single staff person who's volunteering or employed by PTC has to be at every hour of every day, where every speaker is supposed to be, literally down to which part of this building we're supposed to be in every day. And so you can imagine it's scores and scores of people participating to get this thing put together. So if you see anybody today, and there are people behind this curtain, there are people out in the registration area, there are people behind the cameras, there are people doing the TV shoots, there are caterers, there are security people. Anybody who's working with PTC today, just tell them, fist bump on the shoulder, great job, because there are literally scores of people that you'll never see that actually work to a spreadsheet that big. So what we're going to do today is actually undetermined, because I can't remember why I created this topic. It was quite some number of months ago, but I've got some panelists that I've been working with for a couple of days, and we've had some really good conversations. So what I'm going to ask them to do is open with a couple of introductory remarks, and then we'll see where it goes from there. Mr. Ito, you want to start?
Should I go first?
Sure.
Okay, let me introduce my company first, then I'd like to put my opinions about Wi-Fi versus mobile. So NTT Docomo is a software leading company in Japan that has only 60 million subscribers. But speaking of revenues, that has 4th positions next to China Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T. So from my positions, I have to say mobile must be important. Then the topics given is Wi-Fi versus mobile. So from my perspectives, Wi-Fi offloading is becoming more important, more and more. Nowadays, most of operators are suffering from lack of capacities. Capacity is more important for nowadays after the emergence of iPhone 2007. Then, having said that, so when talking about Wi-Fi offloadings, we have set the clear distinction between indoor environment and outdoor environment. Indoor environment, so Wi-Fi offloading is imperative. We have to do that. Indoor Wi-Fi offloading is very appreciated for most of operators. But speaking of outdoor offloading, I have strong concerns about the futures. So speaking about downtown Tokyo, 50% of Wi-Fi channels are interference against each other. That means we have just less than 50% efficiency in downtown Tokyo outdoor. Indoor is okay, but outdoor, sooner or later in New York, in Shanghai, in Beijing, in major cities, you will have Wi-Fi channel interference. So in the long run, we have to bring some new technologies such as LTE Advanced. So LTE Advanced will be the combination of different spectrums, say 2 GHz for macro cell, or 8 megahertz for macro cell, or 1.5 or 1.6 GHz for small cells. That's layered structures. So that kind of new architectures will solve the congestion of mobile communications. So then, speaking of untethered things, in my understanding, 80% or maybe 90% of iPads are untethered in US. Even in Japan, maybe 70% or 60% of iPads are untethered. So most of our customers using iPad or large-scale tablets using an indoor environment. However, most of us also appreciate the always-on, always-connected connectivities that mobile enables. So mobile is still very important for us. Then we will seek the best mix of mobile connection and untethered connections. Then lastly, speaking of fixed mobile operators, your chance exists in backhaul connection and also last mile connections using maybe WiMAX or wireless connections, blah, blah, blah. So last mile, maybe backhaul connections will be a chance for fixed telecommunication operators. Thanks. That's it.
Great, thanks. Norm, got any thoughts for us?
Sure. For those good morning, everybody. For those of you that I haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Norman Fekrat. My background is mostly consulting to the industry. I've spent 19 years at Accenture and several years at IBM, always focused on consulting to the carrier side of the business. And when you talk a little bit about mobility versus untethered, the Wi-Fi strategy, from my perspective, is really a data offload strategy from a carrier's perspective. You have to ask yourself why, right? And when you ask yourself why, it's about moving data tonnage off of the mobile network. Now, why would you want to move data tonnage off of the mobile network? It's because data costs too much on the mobile network. So the carriers have a very aggressive offloading strategy to, when there's Wi-Fi coverage, to default those devices, whether they're mobile phones, tablets, onto the Wi-Fi network to reduce data tonnage and load on the spectrum and also on the backhaul. So that's number one. The second point that I would kind of like to make is, the question is Wi-Fi or untethered, which one's going to win, or what's the right strategy for both? Obviously mobility is always going to be a need, but when you look at some of the statistics, a lot of people are stationary when they're using their mobile devices, hence a untethered strategy exists. But when you really look at what needs to happen on the industry dynamics, when you look at the cost of data from a mobility perspective and then trying to offload it, I'm almost going to say neither one is the one that's going to win, because the current mode of mobility today for LTE and data and mobile video is so expensive when you look at it from a cost per gigabyte perspective and a carrier's profitability per gigabyte perspective. So they want to offload it off the network. So the point that I want to make is mobility and data needs, the approach and solution to it really needs to be re-engineered to support the economics that are required for our industry. So something different needs to happen. The traditional way of mobility, it doesn't look like the economics are supportive for video, for example. And the Wi-Fi offload strategy really isn't a carrier-grade solution today. It's becoming one, but it's been mostly used to data offload and reduce data tonnage in the network. So to the point where the mobile networks can carry mobile video at a high enough quality and from a profitability perspective, then mobility will really be able to support, the true content types and data demands that are out there. And just to kind of, the underlying tone there is that, broadband, mobile broadband, needs to be re-engineered for internet-type economics. And the mobile platforms out there, the cell sites, all the backhaul needs to be just done over the internet. And there's some initiatives going on in the industry that are pushing the mobile packet core all the way out to an enterprise small cell, where you connect to the small cell through your mobile connection, but all the backhaul is just done over the enterprise LAN and over the internet. So I think you're going to start to see some very innovative solutions out there that are going to kind of bridge the gap between, traditional mobility and some of the Wi-Fi offloading mechanisms today to really drive towards the profitability and reducing the cost per gigabyte for video and improving the profit per gigabyte.
So Andy's from Google, and I know you want to hear what Andy has to say. So Andy, you got the floor.
Good morning. Andy Warner from Google. I work on an interesting team at Google. We actually have an access team that works from the edge of our network out towards consumers and businesses, really focused on improving the experience, making sure that people have a fast connection, it's high quality, it's affordable in local terms, and that they have relevant content and other pieces. So we work quite closely with carriers, operators of all flavors, regulators, other people in industry around the world to try and really refine business models and address some of the structural challenges out there to make sure that operators are making good revenues, offering services that consumers and businesses are really interested in, and they're making enough to reinvest. We need a good connection. We're an online company, so the better connectivity people have to us, the better it is for us and presumably for everybody in the middle as well. And we really try and work with the entire chain there to find nice, clean, better solutions to get more people online and improve their experience. So addressing a lot of these issues, the tethering, the various mobile aspects, ways to reduce costs to ship bits back and forth are part and parcel of many of our conversations.
I just remembered, frankly, what the question was that prompted for putting this panel together, and that was last spring, I think it was, and we normally start planning for the next year's conference pretty early. The question I had was, what is the actual strategic role of the fixed network in a world where mobile seems to be the way that most of us are consuming our messaging, more of our content, more of the remote control features for our lives? And it was it wasn't clear to me what the actual right answer should be with that. And in fact, it's interesting. Min, you talked the other day about smart ARPU, which I think is a very clever and valuable term, and at the same time said best effort internet is also the best way to go. It's simple, people understand it, and it's not complicated. So we have both what I would call dumb pipe and smart app and smart revenue strategies, but basically married together. It's not like should the network be dumb or smart. Well, it basically should be dumb, but the applications should be very smart.
Okay. I'm not saying we have to bring a smart pipe. Dumb pipe is okay. Okay, this is the film. Anyway, so smart. I'm not saying we are not passing a smart pipe in general. Okay, good pipe and good customer bases. By utilizing customer bases, we can sell our services to general populations. That we call smart ARPU, generally speaking.
So it's sort of defining it in terms of your customer base, which is the mass consumer in the Japanese market rather than business to business at the top. Okay. Andy, Google, of course, and we were talking about this earlier, basically wants everyone to have broadband as fast as possible because that's what Google wants for the world, for reasons related to Google's business model, of course. But what Google wants really is big pipes and don't constrain them, is my guess.
Yes, it certainly depends where in the world you're looking at. When you go to the interior of Africa, other places, there are more pressing concerns. So when we say everyone, it tends to more be those people who are well beyond subsistence and have the ability to have some discretionary income. But when that happens, we definitely like to see solid investment in infrastructure, and we really solidly believe that the internet can improve people's lives. In pretty much any line of work, you can use it to increase your income, to reduce annoyances in life. So we really like to see pervasive, unconstrained connections, and we believe that opens up a phenomenal number of possibilities.
Now, Norm, you're the panel's expert on carrier costs and revenue metrics and sort of the financial health of an industry that is measuring possibly the wrong things.
Right.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, it's the term wireline economics is a pretty proven economic structure. And when you look at wireless, the costs of spectrum and backhaul are just, significant, where it erodes a lot of the margin in wireless. So when you see, this term small cells on the wireless side, being, a huge growth opportunity for the next couple of years, you're going to see the wireline network get pushed further into the wireless infrastructure because you're going to have more small cells everywhere in the enterprise, in facilities like we're in today, at stadiums, and just the small extending the macro wireless network. And when you do that, you're actually extending the wireline economics and principles further out into the wireless world. And the wireline economics are great. They're good. They're substantiated. They're the cost per gigabyte is reasonable. I would say that there's profitability there. On the wireless side, when you're streaming video over a very expensive spectrum and have to have your own carrier grade, gigabit Ethernet backhaul to it, I think that takes a lot. It raises the cost per gigabyte up significantly, and reduces the profitability of the service. So I see, I see with small cells the economics getting a little better as long as they're engineered, the right way, like an IT Wi-Fi hotspot, and not like a network costly proprietary solution, right?
Yeah, I agree. Norman's perspectives about the backhaul. So as a mobile telecommunication operators, we haven't been taking care of backhaul lines maybe 5 years, 6 years. But to have small cells, maybe 50 meters or 10 meters cell size in very high density areas, backhaul issue is more and more important to solve. So real winner can be a real estate company or convenience stores, whatever. Whatever that brings backhaul lines for small cells or Wi-Fi stations, that is a winner, and also real takers.
Yeah, so the one other point I would make, the reason why untethered and Wi-Fi exists is really because backhaul is so expensive, right? And I know this changes in different countries and geographies.
I see.
But from my perspective, the reason why you connect on a Wi-Fi network and the carriers want you to is because you're on the internet. You're not on the carrier mobile packet core network. So once a mobile network operator can create a small cell or a cell site where that backhaul is over the internet, then you get to equality of economics, right?
Yes, I agree.
And I would suggest or recommend, in my experience with carriers, that should be something that should be looked at from an industry perspective. How can I reduce my cost per gigabyte? How can I re-engineer the mobile broadband network for internet economics? How can I put as much of my traffic as I can on a public internet model and still maintain the security, privacy, and quality of experiences as I can today?
There's some interesting coordination issues that happen as this occurs too. With the traditional macro model, it could have been really strategic, your tower siting, your backhaul. But as you collapse down, and especially if you're using Wi-Fi or other unlicensed frequency, looking at DAS and small cell, microcell, there are only so many places you can drop these locations and you can actually backhaul out of. And so in markets where operators are cooperating more and sort of viewing it as how do we get it out there, and then we really compete on quality of service and our marketing and other things instead of who managed to lock up strategic real estate first and try and exclude others. The general level of happiness and the ability to get people to pay has been much higher and better, and so seeing more cooperation between carriers is more important as you shift to this, because it's not the traditional land grab. Whoever manages to get the high hill and place the big macro cell that can blast out really cheaply just doesn't exist anymore. You need that for rural coverage, you need that for the wide broad, but the infill, everybody has to work together. It's the only way that it works.
So is anybody in the audience who is in the wireline business now beginning to realize, wait a second, what these guys are saying is that the primary function of the landline network is backhaul for the mobile network, or, in my case, as a consumer, support for my Wi-Fi connections in my house, because, they're actually, for me as a consumer, there are two things I want from my fixed network. Video, because I don't want to put that on my mobile for obvious financial reasons, and Wi-Fi for all my digital appliances in the home. And that's the function of the landline network, aside from backhaul for B2B purposes. But that gets back to your question, Norm, about the industry having delivery costs that are simply out of line with the way that end users like me or business users will want to use the entire fixed network. And it's not going to go away. We all agree on that. But the economic opportunity for this, to me, looks like it's getting more hairy every day.
I think the economics will drive out the solution because it always does. And I think when you look at the mobile network and pure mobility, I kind of asked myself a question: why do we need another internet? Right? I mean, we don't need another mobile internet. We should just use the internet. And there's no reason to create this whole second mobile internet. So I kind of fundamentally believe that extending the wireline network and internet principles to the wireless network as much as possible will get to a better economic structure for the industry, and will improve the extension of mobility and the usability of it.
Do any of you believe that actually where we stand today for wireline prices relating specifically to broadband in any of the countries that you're aware of, are the costs actually where they need to be? Leave revenue aside for the moment, because you got to figure out a way to do revenue, but fixed cost is a big deal for the telecom world. Are those costs where they need to be? And if they're not, what do we do to get them down further?
I mean, I think that the cost per gigabyte for a wireline cost per gigabyte, the wireless cost per gigabyte needs to equal the wireline cost per gigabyte.
Or your shorthand would be cost in line with name inserted here.
That's right. I mean, I think, you know,
It's quite difficult to make.
I think, you know, if I was an executive at a carrier, specifically maybe even a mobile operator, you know, I would have a mandate to reduce my cost per gigabyte to be to the equivalence of a Google cost to deliver content. My mandate would be I am not going to lose on cost. So if I'm a carrier and my cost is $6 a gigabyte to deliver a piece of video or any content, I need to get it down to $1 a gigabyte, right? I don't know Google's cost per gigabyte. I don't know if anybody does. I don't even know if they do. Maybe they do.
I don't think people can buy bandwidth that cheap in most cases.
That's right. But, you know, it needs to, that's the, you know, the point, I guess, is, you know, the cost structures of mobility, you know, need to be reduced significantly. And they need to get down as close as possible as the wireline cost per gigabyte.
I have small objections about that because the spectrum is limited. So in Japan, the NT Docomo has been given 180 megahertz band. AT&T, Verizon, I guess also they have been given 110, 120 megahertz bandwidth. Then as far as the bandwidth is limited, so we cannot offer the same equal pricing to comparison to wired lines. So what's your
Yeah, the spectrum is very expensive everywhere globally, and I think, you know, that is a difference. I mean, obviously, spectrum is you know, all the auctions and the amount of money the government's raised to sell spectrum is increases the cost per gigabyte for wireless. So maybe it can never really get down to the same cost per gigabyte as wireline, but, you know, there's a lot of opportunity to get cost reduced out of that infrastructure. And I'm probably picking on backhaul, you know, more than anything else, and converting backhaul to be more of a, you know, internet-based backhaul, or put it on the enterprise LAN network, or different ways to do that, because spectrum is definitely a big cost, and, you know, backhaul is a big cost also.
Not all backhaul is created equal. I mean, if you can get it onto good fiber, that's fantastic. Obviously, that's everybody's first choice. That's the most scalable. That's your best option. But for the vast majority of the world, including large parts of the U.S., you know, copper is the outside plant. It still rules. It's out there. It's decaying. Loop quality is going down. And this takes significant investment. You know, pushing fiber further out, looking at GFast and vectoring and faster technologies. You can't economically take fiber all the way to the user in many cases. So how do you push out and find the lowest cost to get a bit from the user via whatever device they're using and whatever intermediary networks back into your core becomes a big question. And this is going to require ongoing investment. You know, it's not as though there's enough out there. There's lots of infrastructure deployed, but it has to be maintained, and you know, that takes effort. So it's not just how do you make it cheaper, but how do you invest so that over time it becomes less and less expensive and you have a more maintainable plant that's more flexible.
But there's also the issue, again, when you were bringing up the question of spectrum, a lot of people base their business plans on the use of unlicensed spectrum. And depending on where you are in the world, there's quite a bit of that spectrum out there. So the issue is, can that spectrum be released to entrepreneurs in each country, and will people with money back those entrepreneurs to do all kinds of, you know, white spaces in the U.S. and so on and so forth? I don't think we're limited necessarily in terms of, if you're a person who wants to get broadband to end users and you want to make a profit doing it, but you want your customers to be able to afford it, you don't necessarily have to stick with fiber always, or DSL always, or cable modem always, or even in licensed LTE spectrum always. I mean, there are other ways to do this, and there are trade-offs in terms of quality and that sort of thing, but we have a lot of terrain to play with here that I think we're not limited to licensed spectrum only.
Speaking of Japan's white space discussion or unlicensed band discussion is not so hot. Because speaking of five countries, Korea and Japan have been well equipped with fiber everywhere, fiber. But nowadays, now we are having the problems, backhaul issues. Then just a white space discussion just started in urban areas. Then in contrast, U.S. has been suffering from last mile issues and also backhaul issues. Then I understand WiMAX on the white space is a very hot topics in this country.
Yeah. Density is very good when it comes to networks. Generally speaking, except when you've got interference between Wi-Fi hotspots. Long loop lengths, of course, are always very costly. But I'm thinking in many parts of the world, the developing markets are really growing fast, and those people are going to use broadband, and no question they're coming onto the net. And in those places, a lot of rural areas, we're going to be looking at cost parameters. That, we're talking about cost per gigabyte here. We're talking orders of magnitude possibly lower cost for those areas.
So in a lot of those markets, the real challenge isn't the technical or being able to deploy. You can do amazing things with unlicensed. We do a number of Wi-Fi experiments in developing markets. The real challenge is coming up with a viable business model. In markets where people are largely unbanked, it's really difficult. Even if people wish to pay you, it's extremely difficult for them to do so. And so finding ways where you can feasibly build out and have people provide funds to keep it viable and sustainable is surprisingly difficult. And when you sit in the US or North Asia, Western Europe, where everybody has an international capable credit card, you think all these problems are very solvable. And it ends up being some very fundamental challenges of people see value in these services, they will buy them, but they don't have an effective mechanism. So you're not even in the technology realm, you're just in basic business issues.
Yeah. Recharging my devices, for example, how do I get that done? How easy is that?
So let me go back to unlicensed band. Yeah, I'm personally expecting 5 GHz unlicensed band for remedy for urban side Wi-Fi offloadings. But my concern is again, speaking of unlicensed band, eventually we'll see some contaminations or interference amongst different unlicensed band operators. Not operator means just owners. So, yeah, theoretically, I prefer organized licensed band coordinations for urban side solution.
And I can't imagine any tier 1 carrier anywhere saying anything other than that.
Well, that's right. I think, no carrier I know would do a rollout on unlicensed spectrum. And when you look at some of the rural areas that are, difficult places to get network connectivity to, you need to have a different approach. And, I've seen some approaches that have, LTE kind of radios with satellite backhaul. I've seen, carriers, it's very difficult for them to serve those markets, right? Because the cost per gigabyte in those markets is just, too high. So I think there's going to be, needs for, or, solutions will evolve that, will solve, broadband and bringing it to rural areas that needs to be, cost driven. And I think those will be supported. I think unlicensed may have a role in some of that, but, I think carriers, would be very, challenged to support that and do that.
Many years ago, I used to own a small part of a dial-up ISP. I mean, there used to be such things. And I went to a conference of dial-up ISPs and get on this boat cruise, and I think we were in Oregon on some river or something. And the guys were saying, where is the money in our business? And I said, oh, you want the good news or the bad news? And they said, well, give us the good news first. I said, most of the money in that business is in access. And they didn't want to hear that because they were complaining that the money they were making from access wasn't enough. I said, most of the money's in access. So, I mean, if we ask that question in the broadband business, where is most of the money? Today, the answer would be still best effort access, would it not? And I'm not saying that's the only revenue stream that people should be working on, but that's the foundation of the whole business going forward, it seems to me, still.
Content.
Yeah,
I mean,
on the top.
people are willing to pay for content still. Yeah. For top-tier content, you can monetize off of that. The triple play providers, in a lot of cases, are supporting the other two services off of the entertainment content. So if you have top-tier, fresh entertainment content, people are very willing to pay that around the world. The other services, it depends. Some people see
so
value,
it's video
some don't.
and bandwidth-based services of some kind.
That's right. I mean, it's very, the consumer, rules the industry, right? So they buy the device they want, and they go get the content they want. So, you're going to see a continued focus on the consumer driving, the devices they want, and then which access or carrier mechanism they want. And quite frankly, the last couple consumer surveys that were done is they hate the carrier. Actually, when you do an cross-industry consumer survey out of who the consumer, doesn't like the most, it used to be the financial banks and things like that, but now it's the carrier is the one they hate the most. And when the calls drop, they won't even call anymore. They'll just go blog about it or tweet about it and complain to all their friends. Because they think calling the carrier will make a difference. So, yes, they're looking at it as, a connection that always works, and they can get to whatever content they want, and they're willing to pay for some of that incremental content. But then when you look at the unfortunate things that have happened with some of the natural disasters, most recently, I guess, on the east coast of the United States, Sandy, this hurricane came by, and mobility went out. All the carriers. They couldn't, respond to all the people. Some of the sites went out, and then some of the, people couldn't connect because there were too many people trying to use, the network at one time. So when it's out, that's when everyone complains, right? But when it's there, they all kind of take it for granted, right? And they can get to whatever content they want.
Or typhoons, same thing.
Yeah, but that's not depends on the mobile, not the wired. Okay, so all connections are run out when having a disasters. For example, 2 years ago, we had in Japan we had a big earthquake in the east coast of Japan. Then everything will run out, including wired and wireless lines. One issue is, on that day, usually our spectrum is already occupied by a video, 60%. 60% of our spectrum is occupied by video streaming, video content download. Even on that day, 60% of our spectrum is occupied by video. So we need some regulatory issues.
Yeah, watching television isn't a mission-critical application.
Right. Yeah, or messaging or calling to our families or blah, blah, blah. Such things is the most important, most prioritized one. But video, we couldn't do anything about videos on that day.
Well, the other thing that's happened in terms of the way that end users view services like voice is, of course, after we got mobility, we decided mobility is more important than voice quality because, generally speaking, mobile phones don't have voice qualities because it's landline. But then we've also discovered, I think, that the whole notion of what is emergency service, not just in a natural disaster, but in other relatively normal situations, I don't know the last time we've done a major upgrade of like the 911 system in the U.S. And of course, what that means is as we turn off the public network and we go to IP, we probably should use things like text messaging, SMS, instant messaging, and all the other channels we've got available, even in fact if many of those channels are mobile channels, not fixed line anymore. But IP is supposed to protect us from disasters. I mean, it just makes sense that we're going to have to do that kind of migration as well. There have been some horror stories recently about how well 911 doesn't work in the U.S., frankly. In fact, I heard a story that the last engineer who actually worked on code for some of the older tandem switches has now retired. So no one...
There's no more.
Yeah, well, if you wanted to fix the code, I don't know that you could fix it anymore.
Well, I think some carriers and some mobile network operators have seen the erosion of their SMS, right, and text messaging, so they're starting to come up with SMS to 911, right? So they're always looking for new enhancements to some of these data services like SMS to actually, retain some of their messaging revenue. And the highest margin data services, SMS being one of the highest margin data services there.
Okay, so I'm getting Andy.
Well, so on the emergency services, there's a lot of work on the policy and protocol level and trying to handle it. You have some inherent challenges when you do have disaster. You're going to have a massive influx and trying to tear that out, but there's not a tremendous amount of attention paid to the interconnectivity between networks and that interop. And in many countries, there really isn't terribly rich local interconnect, and you can have really bad partitioning. A few of the countries in Southeast Asia have had natural disasters that have effectively cut off entire operators' customer bases from emergency services, which is pretty scary. I mean, obviously, we would much prefer to see interconnect happen on reasonable commercial terms, but when you don't have incentive for them to interconnect, and interconnect in many places, not just one major metro, you can have these events where you end up with partitioning that you may have spent all the time in the world and invested in all sorts of fantastic emergency services communications equipment, and it's meaningless because you've effectively segmented or critical pieces of it are just gone.
So if I had to sum up, and I do have to sum up what we've been talking about, it would be along the lines that, the fixed network isn't going away. We all agree on that. But the lead roles of the fixed network probably are going to change. They're probably still too expensive to operate and build. We need to do things about that, and certainly Google wants to show that it can be done different ways. Probably, though, that mobile is the driver of most of the application innovation right now in our business. Whether we're doing it or Google's doing it, that's clearly where things are happening. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much for listening. Panelists, thank you very much.
Thank you.
PTC'13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'13 sponsors. Mahalo to the PTC'13 Diamond sponsors. Thank you for all of your support. PTC TV is brought to you by PTC'13 Platinum sponsor Equinix. Mahalo Equinix. Thank you for supporting PTC TV. Time now for a keynote speaker interview with Elizabeth Curtin, the president of the Telecom Council of Silicon Valley. And the topic is carriers and innovation.
Good morning. I'm always very happy to be here at PTC. I've been coming for over 20 years. I'm doubly happy this year. First, I get to come back to Hawaii. I grew up out in Ewa Beach for 7th, 8th, and 9th grades, and it's always nice to come back to Oahu. But secondly, when they invited me to do the moderator, they then said I was going to be moderating for Liz Curtin. And I said, well, I don't know that PTC knew this, but I'm one of the very few people probably at the conference that's actually presented to her group on behalf of a startup. I'll give you the long history about that some other time. But I was very, very impressed with what the Telecom Council of Silicon Valley is doing. I also then met and have kept contact with a number of their members. So I'd like to introduce to you Liz Curtin, the head of the Telecom Council of Silicon Valley.
Thank you very much. So for those of you who don't know the Telecom Council of Silicon Valley, we are a trade association where companies join in order to find and discover innovation. So startups come to present, vendors come to look for new technology. We have about 25 telco members from China Mobile and Docomo to Vodafone and AT&T. And our job is to make sure that the big companies are finding the little companies and the little companies are making their message known to the companies who can really get their products and services to the market.
Liz, could you tell us a little bit about how the council works and how it seeks out innovation?
Sure. Well, we probably look at about 500 startups a year. About half of those will actually make it into an agenda. We cover specific topics such as mobile health or machine-to-machine or HetNets. And when we put together an agenda, it's because the carriers and the vendors have said, we're looking for innovation in this particular area. And then the agenda would have some companies that are leading the way from the vendor standpoint, and we usually put about 15 or so startups on the agenda. They get 5 minutes to show what they're working on, to pitch their product, to do a demo, and then really we just let them do all their networking and business development after the mics are off.
When we were chatting, you said there were sort of two drivers of the need for innovation. One was the carrier side because they're looking for things, and the other is all of the stuff bubbling out of Silicon Valley, which I'm sure we've all heard about. Could you tell us a little bit about what's coming from the carrier side and where their interests are?
Sure. Well, in the Silicon Valley, they're relatively public about what they're asking for because the reason that the telcos have people on the ground in Silicon Valley is to reach out into the entrepreneur and the venture capital community and ask for new startups and new ideas. So right now, I'd say generically across the fixed and wireless carriers, the big ask is M2M. So they're looking for products and services and ways to manage massive amounts of connected devices and new products and services for the consumer. They're looking for data center solutions right now. And a big ask for them is analytics and capturing data and storing massive amounts of data. We're seeing digital home, a lot of interest on supplying new services and getting new products into the market for the digital home. And then depending on which carriers we have, British Telecom, for example, who doesn't have a wireless network, the kinds of things that they're looking for are different than maybe a Sprint or an AT&T who may have one or both of the networks.
What about on the Silicon Valley side? What's bubbling and what's hot in Silicon Valley that may be of interest to the carriers?
Right. So that's actually interesting because there's a bit of a chicken and the egg with the Silicon Valley. The venture capitalists have a list of things that they're looking for, and the entrepreneurs are individually building different types of products and services. So the stuff that's actually the ideas that are getting funded right now, there's a lot of mobile health, I'd say, both on the device side and on the service side. Privacy and security is heavily funded right now. If you have a good idea or a good technology for some really deep authentication, there's a lot of companies that would like to fund you. Let's see. We're seeing a lot of cloud services and a cloud infrastructure. So really the list is very, very long. And the way that the 400 or 500 venture capitalists that we have floating around the Silicon Valley, some of them really like infrastructure, some of them really like consumer services. Some of them will invest in apps for a phone, and some of them wouldn't touch apps with a 20-foot pole.
Right. Maybe to make it a little more concrete, why don't we take mobile home? You said that both the carriers and the vendors were interested in this. What are some of the kinds of things that are percolating? What are some of the new ideas that they're looking at and that might have some applicability for the carriers here?
Right. Well, okay, the carriers would like to own that market. They'd like to be the place where the consumer logs into their carrier, their ISP, and manages their lights and their refrigerator and their television. And then you have the vendors, the Samsungs, who they would like to own that relationship. So they're coming at it and they're making investments from a different angle. And you have, you have the actual device companies and the utility actually as well, trying to say, hey, I have a place in the mobile home. In terms of overlap, I'd say there's a lot of interest in getting wide distribution throughout the home of TV signals, and taking your smartphone, where hopefully you have all of your personalized content, and putting that on the various screens throughout the home without having to re-provision another device. Security is quite big. Being able to put an IP address on the various items in your home and log into them from far away and see pictures or talk through cameras and through speakers.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. I did my first project on mobile home, or on the wired home, the smart home, in about 1988. And at that point, we were told that at one of the world's fairs in the 1960s, you could see a video saying how all these things would be so wonderful. So we've been thinking about this for 50 years.
Absolutely.
Why now? What's happening now that makes this an exciting topic for everybody?
Well, obviously the prices of the device and the price of the connectivity has gotten to a place where the mass market can adopt, at least in the developed world. So that's the big thing, that you now have you can have IP addresses and connectivity in places and in devices and form factors that we couldn't have until now. If you wanted to put a security system in your home, correct me if I'm wrong, but 10 years ago, you had to wire each camera, and then you had to have a central system, and then your outside line from the carrier would have to patch into that system. But now you can put a wireless camera on battery, and you can stick it anywhere and log into it from anywhere else.
Good. Maybe let's take another area. You and I had talked previously about antenna technology or Wi-Fi offload. What's happening in some of those types of areas?
On the innovation side. So Wi-Fi has been around, and the carriers, at least in the US and in Western Europe, had poo-pooed Wi-Fi for quite a while as a non-carrier grade technology. They've changed their tune when they look at how much congestion and how much traffic and how much data their networks can actually support. So AT&T bought a Wi-Fi network, and I think there are 60, 70,000 hotspots around the US. There are startups who are working on just putting together public access Wi-Fi into a single coherent network. There's a venture-funded company out of near San Francisco Airport called DeviceScape. But what they have is they've kind of glued together all of the Starbucks and the laundromats that have Wi-Fi hotspots and put them into a single network that can be managed by a carrier with a layer of authentication and management. We've seen new types of access points with new types of backhaul, and backhaul is a very significant area of interest for investment and for carriers as well. But I'd say the Wi-Fi, in terms of the standard and the technology, keeps progressing. Most of the advancements we see in terms of the radio are happening not from the startups, but from the bigger companies, the Broadcoms and the CSRs.
If I could put in just a quick plug, also my firm completely agrees with all of those trends, and we've published extensively, and we were one of the first ones to say that the data explosion is going to cause the Wi-Fi offload. I think that's exactly the way the world has to go.
There's an interesting startup carrier in the US called Republic Wireless, and they have a $20 a month all-you-can-eat voice and data service with these phones. But they are assuming, and they've built the phones and they've built the management protocols such that the phone is basically a Wi-Fi phone. And when you're not near an open access point, it backhauls, if you will, to the Sprint network. So for $20 a month in the US, you can get all-you-can-eat service.
Let's take another topic area. You mentioned mobile health. Certainly, everybody is concerned about health. There's all kinds of layers of this, of what you see in developed countries. I'm doing a lot of work right now with the Inter-American Development Bank on mobile health and facilitating that in developing countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. What are some of the technology inputs that are going to help that along?
In terms of
Innovation.
Yeah. Right. So again, we're back to the cost of the devices coming down, the amount of infrastructure going in that can support. We're getting broadband wireless in places that didn't even have broadband or wireless coming in. We're getting all the way out to the edge in these places where they didn't have any connectivity or even electricity. We're coming with solutions for solar-powered base stations and human-powered. I heard of recently a device where you can put 5 pounds of sand in a bag, lift it up, and get electrical generation for as long as it takes for that bag to fall to Earth. So, 3 hours of a little bit of power. So all of this is meaning that health and services and devices can now go out to places where they haven't been before, and you don't need the doctors to actually travel. And also, if you follow kind of the devices and the companies that are building and innovating, CES was a big trade show that we had in the U.S. in Las Vegas maybe 2 weeks ago, and a massive amount of product launches just on sensors in watches, wearable sensors, communicating everything as is connected to your web service or your doctor.
To reinforce that, I've done a lot of research in Latin America and also with a particular group in the United States, and they're finding that tablet-enabled patients find ways to talk to their doctors in ways that wasn't with live video. And I explained this in great detail at a conference on bandwidth in Latin America, and the person who spoke after me was from one of the large, I won't damn them by telling what, but it's absolutely one of the biggest carriers in Latin America. And he said, this scares the hell out of me because of the amount of bandwidth that you're going to need when you're doing live video that cannot be cached. But there's a tremendous interest right now in adding to that, along with sensors, along with other devices, so that the doctors can cover more people, give better service. And there's also a lot of interpersonal social networking interaction that brings about better health care as well.
Absolutely. A big trend at the CES show was fitness-related devices. So.
Good. Maybe let's take one more area and then open it up for questions. You mentioned M2M is very big. That's the one you led with. Can you, again, share with us what some of the technology drivers and innovation thoughts are in the M2M space?
Well, I think M2M is mostly an eye-opener for the carriers. When they had 100% penetration, or in Europe 130% penetration of people with connections, I think in the US right now it's about 4 connected devices per person. As soon as you add in small devices on the M2M network, that number just goes out of scale. I think Ericsson's predicting 50 billion in the near future. So that taxes the network in terms of management. It taxes the networks in terms of capacity and bandwidth. So the networks are looking at this, and the management and the data centers are looking at this going, we have to future-proof, we have to be able to manage all of these connections, but we also need to find a way to make money. And you can't charge $5 a month for someone's electricity meter.
Right.
So there's as much innovation going on in the hardware and the software and the network side as there is on the business model side, which is where the change probably will come from first.
Good. Well, we've saved a fair amount of time for questions. We've got a little less than 10 minutes to go. We'd very much love to have questions from the floor.
Are we speaking too quickly, or does everyone understand the content? Great.
Question from over there.
Yes, hi. It's Michael Haley with IBM. Quick question about your activities in the Telecom Council of Silicon Valley. Can you sort of provide an overall context for, I don't know, the numbers of millions of dollars versus for telecom segment versus overall IT or other areas of innovation? I'm just trying to understand if this is sort of a 1 or 2% slice of the total investment portfolio, or if it's bigger or if it's growing. What is your view, please?
Do you have an answer? Because I can talk about telecom relative to investment. I'll tell you what I do know, and then maybe John can supplement. But I think it's about $800 billion going into telecom globally in the investment, venture investment, and about 50% of that globally going into Silicon Valley companies. So that when you you add Boston and Texas and Seattle and San Diego together, it's still about half of what's going on in Silicon Valley. And there's a lot of investment also going on in Israel and in the UK. So in terms of where the ideas and the venture capital is coming from, in terms of overall versus tech, I don't know what that number is.
I don't either.
Yeah.
I know that this continues to be a very hot area, and again, this has almost been a cliche at conferences I've been at, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. Apple changed everything. Apple woke the community up to that there's a way to rethink telecom as a personal interaction with the people, with the original several thousands and then hundreds of thousands of applications. Just if you watch CNBC, the talking heads, and I have a great deal of respect for them, they spend much more time on telecom than they used to. Globally, national broadband plans are absolutely the rage. Absolutely the rage. And then behind them, you then have to have a whole series of technology choices and development. And investment in telecom is very robust, especially outside the United States. You know, we were going to spend, we spent $7 billion promoting stuff here. In Australia, which is a tenth the size, they're spending 5 times as much. Right now, Africa, Latin America, and developing Asia are all moving very rapidly. That's not to say that there still isn't a tremendous amount of R&D going into the latest chipset. You know, God love the IT people and that part of the world. They've always been somewhat larger than telecom. But that you could do more with technology, I think there's been a sea change since the Apple came out in the perception of people. And Liz, you're...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would add that there are some funds and some firms that invest only in telecom, and that number has been growing over time.
Yeah.
It used to be 1 or 2 partners at a given firm, and now we have entire funds dedicated to telecom. And from my perspective, over the past 10 years, watching venture investments and companies get started, the innovation and the fundings that are happening in telecom is still right now, and especially more so since 2007, about 70 or 75% on the wireless side.
Another area that Liz mentioned, it's probably not in dollar volume that huge, but it's becoming disproportionately important, is analytics. There's an explosion of people interested in analytics, both to help the telephone network work better and then to interface with the customer and know more about the customer and what's going on with the customer. And again, the cellular and mobile revolution is all part of that. But the analytics, the amount going to analytics and the interest in analytics, and by the way, IBM is a leader in this as well, is tremendous. Yeah.
We did see a dip in venture investing in telecom in 2001 to about 2005. I think it started.
And everybody in this industry remembers why.
Yeah. But one of the things that happened from the venture capitalists, and when venture capitalists, so that you know, they're generally making investments in companies who are either pre-product or they have a product and they're pre-scale. And the investments, I would say, typically around $5 million at a time. So a company will get $5 million, they'll build the product, they'll go back and they'll get $5 million more, and they'll go to market. So they got that venture capital segment got scared of infrastructure, and they haven't come back in full force since 2002, 2003 when they stopped investing.
Good. We've got a little less than 5 minutes. How about some more questions? Anybody?
Just a quick question. Are you also looking at startups that are outside the Valley?
Oh, for the Telecom Council? Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
The reason that the Telecom Council of Silicon Valley exists where it does is because Vodafone and China Mobile and Telefonica and Docomo, they have people on the ground looking for ideas, looking for technology, looking for startups, doing deals. It's not because we've decided that we're only looking at Silicon Valley technology. That happens to be where a critical mass of the carriers are coming together and doing the same thing. So in a lot of cases, the UK government will bring a whole suite of 15 companies to present to the Telecom Council at once, or the French government will bring a bunch, or some Israeli startup will say, I need to go present to those innovative carriers, and they'll get on a plane and come out.
I'm Jag Rao. My question is, what is the typical return the VCs expect from the developers or vendors? Are there some guidelines to follow in that?
Well, yes. They have some metrics and they have some expected returns, and those numbers have been changing over time. I think you're probably equally as aware. But they generally, the rule of thumb is they're going to invest in 10 companies, and one of them is going to have a nice exit. Exit meaning where the investors get their money back. And it used to be a 10x. So if I put in $1, I'm going to get $10 out. They haven't hit 10x probably since the dot-com boom, right? And so now they're perfectly happy with a 2 or 3x. So if you go to them and you tell them, you promise them a 5x return, a lot of the venture capitalists right now will roll their eyes at you and say, I don't think you can hit that. But if you can show me a business model that works with a 3x return, with this amount of investment and this amount of capital, then we'll look more closely.
And going IPO and so on, they get more money later on, don't they?
I'm sorry?
In that follow-on revenue stream, coming from equity in the company, and when you go IPO, they can cash in too.
They love IPOs, yeah.
Yeah. Good, other questions?
In the middle.
I hear that, that there's a lot of development in like India and Southeast Asia on low-cost telecom devices, and I wonder if they're showing up over there.
I didn't quite hear that.
Is there a lot of development going on in India, Southeast Asia, and other places on devices and/or services, software, et cetera?
Well, so that's one of the paradoxes when we talk about investment in telecom, is there's a lot of it that's visible, and the venture capitalists are picking companies, and the CVCs like Docomo Capital and Qualcomm Ventures are picking industries, but there's also a lot of investment going on inside a company. So Samsung doing some internal investment in building low-cost tablets, et cetera. So I don't have a good pulse on all of the activities that are happening at a corporate R&D level, but from the venture level, I can say that Mayfield, New Enterprise Associates, and I can name a bunch more, but a lot of the big venture capital funds have put people on the ground in these developing worlds, in India, in China, and they're trying to expand their reach, both for looking for startups, but also for getting people to invest in their funds, to grow the funds.
Yeah.
So,
I don't want to emphasize a sample of one, but I'm very familiar, because I consulted to them, of an analytics company. That's part of my interest in analytics, where their original ratio was about 25 people in India to 1 in Silicon Valley, and that's now shifted to probably 10 to 1 ratio, but with more people total, maybe a 5 to 1 ratio. You will have some work done in Silicon Valley and some work done in lower cost centers. India is tremendous for software and that type of thing. China is very strong on the hardware side. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but there is an increasing tendency to work both sides of the Pacific Ocean in a relationship that makes sense and allocates resources accordingly. Other questions? Maybe time for one more. They just told me the time is up, so
You're off the hook.
I'd like to thank Liz, and then we enjoyed being here and presenting to you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Now more than ever, broadband is life. It's the modern heartbeat that connects our world. And like our own heartbeat, we take it for granted that it'll always be there, until the day it's not. Too much is at stake for businesses to rely upon old technologies trying to catch up with today's broadband explosion. Ciena is different. We expected the inevitable and designed fiber optic networks that could handle it. The Ciena GeoMesh unifies terrestrial and submarine networks like never before. It's intelligent, self-aware, and self-healing. When submarine cables get cut or terrestrial links are damaged, the system automatically reroutes communications in milliseconds. So if Ciena's GeoMesh can keep connectivity working at the worst of times, just imagine how well it performs at the best of times. With demand for broadband increasing by 40% a year and submarine cables quickly approaching terabit carrying capacities, businesses need global networks they can trust to handle their skyrocketing challenges. Our streamlined network delivers faster speeds, reduced latency, and fewer points of connectivity to manage and worry about. It all adds up to improved performance, lower operating costs, and greater cooperation. It's no wonder that Ciena has become a dominant player in the submarine network market in just a few years. And when you consider that a submarine cable is severed once every 3 days, or that a terrestrial cable is damaged every 30 minutes, an intelligent, self-healing network is critical. However, the greatest threat isn't a natural or man-made disaster. It's becoming one of these guys, being left behind because demand outstripped performance. Broadband is life. Make sure you have the most innovative network, the smartest people, and the most advanced technology working for you. Ciena's GeoMesh. Undersea, over land, networks unite.
PTC'13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'13 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC'13 Platinum sponsors. Thank you for all of your support.
Hi, I'm Gary Kim with PTC TV, and I'm here today with Mike Rouleau, Senior Vice President with TW Telecom. Now, I've known you for well over 14 years. You're a Denver kind of person. I'm from Denver. Your firm is one of the very few that I actually remember from that sort of telecom bubble and burst.
Right.
You know, late 1990s, 2000. You guys were known then for having extreme financial discipline.
Right.
I'm assuming that's one of the things that allowed you to survive.
One of the things that's kept us going. You know, it's interesting. The other thing I think is innovation. So back in the bubble days, we sort of charted our own course and focused a lot on Ethernet. That's become a key driver of our business over the years. So we introduced Ethernet services back in 2000. And
everybody else was connecting Class 5 switches, right?
Well, Class 5 switches and doing frame relay and ATM, and so we really charted our own course. So having that fiber network really helps us because it gives us a lot of flexibility. But it's all about the services, and it's about what we can give customers in terms of capabilities and scalability. And now, you know, we're coming into this next wave of computing with cloud infrastructure and how people are starting to develop that. And Ethernet is really playing a key role, right? The network really matters when we start talking about things that are going on in cloud.
It's really interesting, the mobile backhaul market, how quickly it's moved to embrace Ethernet as the standard for connecting macro cells.
Absolutely. Yeah, because, you know, you think about the scalability and the capacity that you can deliver, and, you know, we've introduced some new capabilities on our Ethernet platform that really lend itself to a cell site provider, right? So you think about our ability to deliver dynamic capacity or bandwidth on demand is a new service that we rolled out on our Ethernet platform. Well, if we can deliver 100 meg to a cell site and they all of a sudden have need for more capacity, they can go to our portal, turn it up, turn it down, they can double or triple the capacity that we deliver to them instantaneously. So we provision that kind of capacity in less than 15 seconds and give the customer the ability to turn it back down when they're done or schedule an event. But you think about like a football game, right, where all of a sudden you've got a new city, right, in a stadium. 80,000 people show up. That really stresses a cell site. And so here's where we could give them the capability to increase that capacity on demand to meet the needs of those users in the stadium.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot during the conference about dynamic bandwidth and lower cost bandwidth. And this sounds like the sort of thing that everybody's got to have. Back in the old days, as you well remember, somebody asked for a DS3, and we're quoting months until we can deliver it. And this sort of 15 seconds, are you crazy? It's amazing.
It is. It really is. And it enables a whole set of new applications, which is what I find fascinating. So having the ability to increase your capacity, do it automatically without taking your services out, really gives customers flexibility they haven't had before, right?
Now, traditionally, your customer base started out enterprise and multi-site enterprise, and some carriers, because I mean carriers and enterprises in some ways are the same kind of customer. Content customers began to come into view, I don't know whether it's 5 or 6 years now, I've lost track, but are the requirements of a content company customer different than an enterprise customer or a carrier?
Well, you know, I sort of think about it as the content guys want to talk to the enterprise guys. So the enterprise customers are their consumers, and so they have all the same needs that a traditional enterprise has, just in reverse, if you will, into the data centers, into where the content providers are delivering their applications. And so as we evolve cloud and as things are starting to move towards an on-demand infrastructure, those content guys want to be able to take advantage of network on demand as well in a secure, scalable, predictable way.
In your discussions here in Honolulu with potential business partners, what is it you're primarily pitching to them?
Well, I think the important thing for us in working with those customers is the Ethernet scalability, the intelligent network services that we're delivering, that bandwidth on demand, dynamic capacity. Those are really getting people's attentions.
Great. Mike, thanks for speaking with us today.
Thanks very much, Gary.
And thank you very much for watching.
A very special mahalo to the 2012 PTC Board of Governors for their year-round leadership and support. Are you plugged into social media? Then join the conversation online. Follow PT Council on Twitter and use the PTC'13 hashtag pound PTC'13. You can also like Pacific Telecommunications Council on Facebook. Time now for another keynote interview. Lou Tucker, the Vice President of Cisco and CTO of Cloud Computing, talks about getting real about cloud computing.
Hi, everyone.
Hey there.
You guys are good to stick around for lunch. So we're going to talk about an area that's been talked about a lot and is always bandied about, and it's a big deal in Silicon Valley now. It has been for a while, but it's really becoming more and more obvious as these tablets and smartphones and everything else move into the hands of businesses and consumers. And one of the bigger companies who've been kind of a little late to the game in this area is Cisco, a big platform provider.
Right.
So we're going to talk about sort of what's really going on here and who are the big players going to be and what are some of the big issues facing it. Because big data and the way people get their information, whatever it is going to be sort of one of the critical issues of the next, I think, computing cycle.
Sure.
So why don't we start, Lou? Why don't you talk about what you do exactly?
Okay, so I'm Lou Tucker. I'm CTO of Cloud Computing at Cisco Systems. And in that role, I'm responsible for, since I'm a CTO, I'm supposed to look around corners and figure out the future. But more than anything is actually understanding this market and how the market dynamics kind of work. And then I'm driving also a lot of open source initiatives because in many ways I see in response to look at what's changed in the application world. I mean, the age of sort of package suites of commercial applications for enterprises is changing into 700,000 apps that are available now on the iPhone. So when you say how are you going to serve those applications out over the internet, one part of cloud computing is how you reach your consumers with that. The other part is what are you running that on? And that's why there's really, I think, in this last couple of years, the growth of this cloud platform. And people are getting very serious, and we're learning from the Googles and the Amazons and large-scale web companies, what is the software infrastructure that's running on these very, very large data centers? So Cisco is taking a real interest now in what is that cloud platform layer so that we can start to offer that service out to customers as software.
So what took Cisco? Cisco has been one of the great platform players of the old internet, I guess, the way it was done there.
Yes, exactly right.
And Amazon moves in with its web services. Google obviously is a huge player. They have so much ability to do this. And several others, even small ones like Dropbox, others which are being used by a multitude of businesses, Box, Salesforce. There's so many people have moved into it. Explain what happens. Cisco's offered a certain thing and then had to get into this.
So Cisco is an infrastructure provider.
Right.
And so we provide systems for people, and a large part of the internet and the growth of the internet has benefited Cisco's business greatly. A couple years ago, we actually also started selling servers. And so Blade systems, and so now we're, depending upon how you count, number 2 in the US in unit shipments of Blades. So now computing and networking are coming together. And so we can call it unified computing, fabric-based computing, a lot of these things. So more than anything, we're looking at it from the point of view of moving up the stack. We know that the value chain is actually the closer you are to the customer, the higher in any value chain you can extract from that. And so Cisco's businesses began to move up into not only into this platform area, but also then into the applications, video applications. We have a SaaS offering, WebEx, which is probably like number 2 SaaS company out there today. So we're really looking at the totality now of these different layers and trying to understand best. Cisco has a very wide business. A lot of companies are not even virtualized yet. Perhaps now 80% of the enterprise is using virtualization in one form or another. And cloud's small still. I mean, the reality is that it's maybe in 20% of the enterprise companies are looking at a cloud. And what was somewhat surprising, they're looking at building their own cloud. The fears of giving control over to a service provider and everything else are still out there. And so a lot of people want to know, how do I build a cloud? And it turns out duplicating what Amazon's done or Google or anything else is not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. And so what's been interesting in the last couple of years has been not only we see VMware moving up the stack from a hypervisor and vCloud Director, which Cisco is a great partner of VMware in that, but also then looking that the open source community responded. And so one of the things that would be good to get into is actually something called OpenStack, which is now a very robust, rapidly growing open source software platform allowing anybody to build their own Amazon-style cloud in-house if you just want to run a private cloud, or the service provider serving.
So you're talking about making these private cloud networks, which I think is a very serious concern. I mean,
and the software that sits above the network. So it's not just in the networking layer, but it's also in the compute infrastructure running across these.
Do you imagine this being, we'll get away from Cisco in a second, being the most important part of your business going forward? I mean, there are the innards of the internet that Cisco has always been providing, but it seems as if things shift rather rapidly. And here's a business that was almost nothing that Amazon went into at a very early time, and I'll use Amazon first because I think they're the most aggressive, maybe 7, 8 years, what was it like?
Amazon is the clear leader in providing a public cloud for the world. Absolutely clear leader. I think that, I mean, when we look, and it's been interesting being at this conference because, quite frankly, my background is not in the telecom and looking at wholesaling and things like that. But it is a value chain. And so, actually, the trick is making all of these pieces work together to deliver what users want, which is that user experience at the end of the day. And I liked, actually, your comments about it yesterday. That's what we're all trying to achieve. And as an industry, we have to make these layers now work together. And networking, in particular, has been one of those last to virtualize.
Right.
Compute virtualized a couple of years ago with hypervisors, so we can now get greater efficiency out of servers. And networking's been rather static. In the last 2 years or so, there's been a whole movement called SDN. So SDN, which is much more about how do we have dynamic provisioning of network, how do we have software control over how the flows go both within a data center and across the WAN. And these things sort of come together. Now, how then does the application talk to them?
Right.
Applications, quite frankly, application writers, and I've developed very large websites, don't want to deal with the networking infrastructure. They want to think about it more in terms of, I have an application that wants a streaming video network, a network optimized for streaming media. They're not going to understand quality of service, costs, and everything else. They would like to be able to say, if I'm a mobile app, I would like to be able to be called back if the call gets dropped. Because maybe at the app, I can do something about that. So cloud computing platform is that software that sort of connects these different layers. And in many ways, I think starts to create the conversation between the application developer in a language that the app guy writes and the low-level infrastructure without having to file a trouble ticket for some network operator to go in and change something.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the challenges faced. Let's start first, you were talking about these private networks. There's several issues that come up publicly and in the media, and they're concerned. Let's start with privacy issues. And also, not just privacy, but breaking down issues, which is presumably why people want to do that. I mean, the famous one was Netflix over Christmas. Weren't able to deliver movies, which is their business, even though Amazon's continue to work inexplicably.
Which is actually a very interesting example because now, traditionally we say the network broke. It's a network fault.
Right.
The infrastructure failed, or servers failed. This was the first time there's actually a failure in the software service that had significant impact. Even a company like Netflix, which Adrian Cockcroft there, who's designing most of those systems, is brilliant in terms of how he says the resiliency is actually the responsibility of the application now. You can't count on the infrastructure.
Right.
You have to write it that way. But even in the face of then a massive kind of outage that Amazon had, it did affect Netflix and all Netflix customers.
So talk about the idea of wanting to, why would everyone want to do these private clouds? Obviously, this is something Cisco's going to focus on because that's how they sell things. They sell the individual companies.
We sell actually both to service providers and to enterprises. I think the biggest distinction is whether people are building a cloud for delivery of enterprise IT services back into the enterprise. And that is actually where VMware has really focused and it's a natural progression from virtualization into now a self-service kind of portal where IT services can be delivered for employees. Companies have many larger number of customers than they do employees generally.
Right.
So as people now are using the internet to reach their customers, they're looking for a cloud that is much more aligned with how Amazon has been built, how Google's been built. Large scale is paramount. When you're at large scale, failure is inevitable. You will have failed components always. And you want to be able to have somebody go down the aisle and look for the red blinking light and swap that out, and the application keeps running.
Right.
So that's where a lot of the focus I think that we're seeing in kind of the open source community, looking at OpenStack, designing a cloud that can be deployed in either privately, internally, but if you look at, for example, iCloud, Apple recognized that it needed to serve its customers through a cloud. It's not hosting an Amazon-style cloud. It's not trying to provide cloud services. It has an application that sits on a cloud platform for its consumers.
Yes, and it's the one application they do badly, which is amazing. It's incredibly shocking.
Mobile Me was the
I keep going.
choice.
iTunes isn't so good either.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting. I mean, that's a software application, but it doesn't work in any way.
Right, right.
I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting problem they have.
Right.
They do so well. On
What was interesting, though, it was a very telling moment, one of Steve's last keynotes, whatever, when he was talking about, initially Apple wanted the center of the universe to be a person's PC. And everything was synchronized with that. And then all of a sudden, when people had 2 iPhones and 3 iPads and everything, that became unwieldy. And so they recognized the real synchronization point has to be up in the cloud. And that's where they saw that as being a much better experience for the user. And in fact, I just switched phones or whatever, and most of my music now is up in the cloud, and I haven't bothered to bring it down on my device until I actually want to listen to it.
So let's talk about what it looks like. What are some of the misconceptions do you see about that in cloud services that are out there among both enterprise and in the consumer space?
So one, there's no magic. You still require excellent architecture, design. The cloud does require applications to be responsible for their own resiliency. Applications have to be able to, just like we built TCP/IP on top of an unreliable transport, applications have to recognize when you're running at scale, you will see failures. So there's no magic bullet with cloud computing. One of the positive sides has been it's provably, and I'd love to see the studies that will probably be done years from now, it's the absolute fastest way to develop and deploy new apps. That's why we're seeing the explosion of number of different apps and services. 3 guys in a coffee shop in Sand Hill Road, can go and actually build something very quickly and bring it to market and have an audience of millions.
Because there's no distribution problems.
It solves the distribution problem. It allows.
Because God knows we need another photo sharing app.
That's right. That's right.
Let's not solve cancer, but let's have another photo sharing app.
Now the problem's being inverse. How do you find the right app for you?
Right.
I mean, there's 700,000 out
Discovery
there. How
is
can
an
you
issue.
possibly find one? What has been built? So we're seeing these special purpose, narrowly built apps, which I think is positive. Some of the misconceptions, I think, and I might as well address it head on, the number one impediment stated by the enterprise that they don't want to go to an outside service provider is security. And it gets to the loss of control. And when they think about the security, they say, well, what they really want is somebody to call up on when they have an outage or they have a problem. They want somebody to call, in their own employee to yell at. Whereas if you're running on a public service, provider, it's much harder to have that kind of thing. But in fact, as you aggregate more and more applications and users and companies, I think that the security infrastructure is going to be much, much better than ever is in an individual company's data center.
That they're more vulnerable on an individual basis.
No, I think that they were going to have better security practices.
That's what I mean. But
yes.
When they're doing an individual,
but you never really question your own enterprise, how good are my security practices? Whereas at Amazon or at Salesforce.com, they have to be first rate.
Right, but have not always been. I mean, there's been different issues.
We will always have cybersecurity issues. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about cloud. Once you connect to the internet, you are going to have to address those security issues.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about that because it is whether they're going to be secure. One of the issues is when they use the security excuse. My partner Walt Mossberg always calls it sort of the tyranny of the CTO. Well, I'm sorry to insult you, but he compares them to the people that were on the wall of the Soviet Union. They don't really want to change much. The Soviet ministries do not feel like changing that. Is there resistance?
But that's usually the CIO, not the
CIO.
CTO.
Oh, sorry. Okay, not the CTO. Is there resistance in these companies on just a basic cultural level of not wanting to give up these abilities?
It's always a cost associated with change.
Right.
And so obviously people would love to just continue to optimize their current practices and get better and better and better at it. It's only when companies like Bechtel looked at actually how do I compare? One of the beauties of having public cloud providers, there's a market price now for computing. And it's falling. It was 10 cents per CPU hour a year or two ago. Now it's around 5 cents. So CIOs and CFOs can now look and say, well, what is my internal cost for doing that? And they can start to see there's a big difference there. Then they can say, okay, well, now is it really because I'm outsourcing everything to a service provider, or is it the change in how applications are developed and deployed? And when they start to dig deeper into that, they see there may be, if an enterprise is of a certain scale, they will build their own private cloud.
Right.
And fundamental to that, they have to change their IT practices. They are competing with a service provider that's honing its skills every day in rapid delivery of services. They have to be able to compete with
Let's talk, we're going to get, if anybody has any questions in a second, but what do you see the next iteration of where the cloud is, this conceptual thing? You had there's the small providers like the box, which have exploded in usage, which is interesting because they're such a small company, and yet people seem to like their product, mostly because it's software, it's easy to use. You have efforts like Google who have been successful, but less successful than I would argue, than a box or a Dropbox. And then you have the big providers. How do you see it shaking out that the big providers will eventually purchase all these, or there will be how do you look at the marketplace?
It's hard to say on the acquisition side, because I think in many ways there is still unexplored opportunity, and that there aren't enough startups that are exploring that entire space yet today. So sometimes you are forced to innovate yourself. You also recognize perhaps it's better not to have total control. So like with OpenStack, we've joined with HP, IBM, Dell, Red Hat, Nicira. We started a network as a service, recognizing it's better for the industry to collaborate on those things, because cloud computing really does require this kind of interoperability, portability of applications, and so let's, as an industry, solve that problem. I think that I'm pleasantly surprised to see the growth of cloud-based storage. I think that that's a clear win for people. People generally are in that funny situation. You believe you're secure if you backed it up onto your local hard drive on your desk until you have a fire in your house. And then you recognize, no, it would be better to get that someplace else. Looking out further, I think that we're going to start to see cloud computing just expand. It's, like I said, it's maybe 20-30% of the enterprise today, but continue to expand in that area. And I think we're starting to see in this last year, I think the biggest change that I saw was actually most of the sort of telcos and service providers waking up and understanding they have to compete. The Googles and the Amazons who are using the pipes are taking most of the value, and that the providers of that infrastructure need to have a way to capture some of that.
And
I think they will do that by offering services.
Similar services.
Similar services. So they have to learn. And so that they have data centers, they have points of presence. We all know that, if you take a look at CDNs in the West, I think we'll see many different variations of what it means to have content at the edge, closer to the user, push applications closer to the user. So today I think we're looking at cloud as being a data center phenomena. I think it'll start to become much more of a network phenomena, that the cloud will extend out over all of the tiers so that you can get basically the advantage of a larger scale distributed system and better user experience.
And that's because of the prevalence of these tablets. And I said yesterday, tablets are now outselling everything, smartphones and tablets together. It's because of these ability to move that these require.
I think the long-term trend is always that we go through these cycles of consolidation and centralization, and then pushing everything out to the edge.
Right.
And then we centralize again, and we go through, as a CTO, those are the kind of long-term cycles I see. A lot of that is it's easier to figure out when you centralize and you get a global view. Then you recognize now, however, you're in the center, and you really should be pushing a lot of that. The growth is all on the edge.
Right.
So push everything out to the edge.
With these devices leading
With these
the way.
devices, and so I think we'll see, and I'm actually very intrigued by some of these services where you can share if you're a small service provider, you can actually become part of a larger CDN and just collect revenue because you have a POP. And you can start to serve content locally.
I see, interesting. Yeah, because someday, there's going to be like an eye, and you can't store a lot in your eye, so you'll have to get
So the computer scientists, you always look at how you distribute intelligence, how you distribute caching, and therefore I think the next couple of years, particularly in this industry, I think there's going to be a lot more growth in terms of how does the rest of this industry fit into this cloud computing model and provide the services.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Right here? Go ahead. I don't know if there's a thing, a mic. Here he is. That guy has the mic. He's wandering around, but this guy's over here. Oh, back there, and then this guy, and then we can only take 2 questions. Go ahead.
You mentioned open source and OpenStack briefly in passing, and I wondered if you can comment on looking at your company's own initiatives and at the broader landscape, how is OpenStack delivering on its hoped-for advantages in terms of scalability and platform for delivering end-user hosting services?
Surely. I think Cisco responds to change, and that we see actually in the open source community a lot of very interesting change that will help customers and everything else. So we're a big proponent of open source. I'm actually vice chairman of the OpenStack Foundation, and we're seeing that serve that segment of our market. We have a very large market that actually has the sort of engineering wherewithal and the need for scale that an open source project can provide there. So, for example, we're working with Comcast, and they're looking at that as if they're going to, now they want to deliver content to everywhere, on every device.
Been a big provider of theirs for many
years. And so they are looking at OpenStack as being, whereas they roll out these new kinds of services, perhaps it's better, instead of building them as the stovepiped applications like they used to, build them on a cloud platform such as OpenStack.
Last question?
Yeah, I'm Jag Rao. How do you address the issue of security in a hybrid environment where the boundaries are diffused and not clear? Where does the accountability for a security breach go? How do you define that?
I'm in that camp that actually thinks like cloud computing actually does not change anything, particularly in terms of security. You have to have the right practices and use the network in order to do that. One of the things, for example, we're doing in OpenStack is recognizing there was traditionally cloud computing as a compute service and a storage service, and networking was just connectivity. We recognize, no, you really need a network service. One of the reasons for that is I was running a lot of the web infrastructure of java.sun.com, sun.com, large websites. We were attacked constantly. And believe me, I never wanted to have my database directly routable from the internet. That I was using the network as part of my security practice in terms of protecting resources. And so in OpenStack, we recognized that was a real need. So we have a network service that allows the creation of virtual isolated networks on a per-tenant basis or on an application basis. So you can have that, you can use the network as a part of your security solution instead of just like hiding behind firewalls.
Any more questions? Last question. We have 1 more minute.
What do you see as the future for OpenFlow and software-defined networks?
Yeah, so OpenFlow and SDN I'm a big proponent of. I think that what we're seeing, and I've talked actually on other panels here, that is now we are virtualizing the network just like we had virtualized computing. And what it represents is that we need to, we in many ways have to increase the level of automation and the software control and have much more of a global view of what's going on. So OpenFlow is actually a low-level protocol that allows you to manage an individual forwarding plane of a switch. But it's most important, most impactful, I think, in terms of we're getting now software and DevOps and everything else now involved in managing network itself. So it's no longer these arcane CLIs, people trying to type on keyboards to affect change. We really want automated scripts, things Puppet and Chef and other ways to use software to now configure the network and to increase the utilization, which is one of the things you get from virtualization, but also then to be able to use unused links and to be able to span perhaps multiple data centers with flows. So I think SDN, OpenFlow, and cloud computing, which exists at 2 different layers, complement each other so well, and that the job of the now cloud platform is to provide that conversation between the app and what you can do with SDN.
And I'm going to ask one more quick final question. What's the most, right now, innovative company in cloud, one large and one small, things they're doing? Not, you can't answer Cisco.
Large one is clearly Amazon. Mm-hmm. Small, it's much, much harder. There really are so many, and I would agree with you, things like Box.net and Dropbox. They're providing key fundamental services. Meraki we just acquired, which has to do with moving now administration of networking into the cloud. So it's a cloud service way to start to interact with the networking elements. It's all about making it easier, dynamic, faster, and less error prone.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Lou.
Thank you.
PTC'13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'13 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC'13 Gold sponsors. Thank you for all of your support. During PTC'13, the PTC Secretariat will be located in C-Pearl 3 on the 6th floor of the Mid-Pacific Conference Center at the Hilton Hawaiian Village Waikiki Beach Resort. If you need assistance from a member of the Secretariat, please visit C-Pearl 3. PTC'13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'13 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC'13 Silver sponsors. Thank you for all of your support. Time now for the day's last keynote presentation. Joe Weinman, Senior Vice President of Cloud Services and Strategy at Telex, talks about cloudonomics, the combination of cloud strategy and economics.
Thank you very much. All right, I know I'm standing between you and lunch, so I'm going to go through some things. Obviously, cloud is critically important to sort of the evolution of the communications industry, and we just heard about some of that, and there's a lot of thoughts around networks and SDN and OpenFlow and cloud and quantum and OpenStack and everything else. What I'm going to do is actually take a very different tack and talk about some of the business and economic implications of the cloud, and I hope to debunk some myths along the way. So let me get started. For those of you that don't know, I'm with Telex, and Telex briefly is a primarily US national data center, carrier neutral, interconnection, co-location, and cloud enablement provider. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but we've got a great footprint and we enable quite a few clouds, and so I want to talk about some of the thinking behind that. What I did is I spent about a year of my life after my day job working on this book called Cloudonomics, and unfortunately all of the short titles like War and Peace and Hawaii were taken, so Cloudonomics was the only one left. But the point is to cover some of the business strategy and economic implications of cloud computing, because there's no shortage of technical books and analyses out there, but I tend to think very simply about what the cloud is about, and hopefully I'll change your perception of a few things. So let's start off maybe by thinking about some of the basics of what people assume about the cloud. And I just want to start with this foundation because this is what everybody knows to be the case, and so this will save you reading untold analyst reports and magazine articles if I just go through some of the fundamentals. First of all, the cloud is obviously completely revolutionary, both from a business model and technology perspective. Secondly, the primary benefit is cost reduction, although increasingly people talk about business agility. Economies of scale are the key to cloud benefits. In fact, there's a famous analyst group that titled one of their reports exactly this. And the theory is, of course, that we're talking about an entirely type of new data center architecture, and you achieve enormous economies of scale by consolidating hundreds of thousands of servers in these new data centers. Another key benefit is the opportunity to replace CapEx by OpEx. I don't think you can see a single presentation without mentioning that, because CapEx is bad and OpEx is good. Rational decision makers like CIOs will, of course, want to take advantage of those cost savings. And then another observation, therefore, is if there are scale economies, that inexorably leads to consolidation. Because if I can take two mid-sized providers, create a large provider, that reduces the unit cost of delivery, creating a competitive cost advantage, and thereby being able to achieve market share increases. As Nick Carr says, this big switch to cloud computing ultimately leads to the commoditization of IT, and therefore all IT will move to the cloud, which in a way is fine because IT doesn't matter, to use the title of another Nick Carr book, because it's just basically a commodity out there, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. So since IT doesn't matter strategically, your objective should really be to minimize the costs of IT. And I'm talking about IT, obviously, very broadly. I'm also considering the network component of that and the thoughts around distributed fabrics. So the net impact of this cost reduction in turn means that IT departments will, of course, be able to reduce their IT spend and spend things on things that are more important than mere plumbing. There are some issues. One of them is electricity consumption in data centers. Another one is security in the cloud. And people also talk about the fact that the cloud doesn't really create jobs. So these are all the basics about cloud computing that you need to know. Or to be more precise, they're all the basics about cloud computing that you need to forget. I think all of these are, I used to say dead wrong, but now that I'm a kinder, gentler Joe Weinman, I'll just say that they're questionable arguments. So to take a few of them in turn, those of us that date back to like the 1960s and MVS and time-sharing system know that virtualization and multi-tenancy are not exactly new concepts. But I think you can follow things back even earlier than that to, for example, the Roman Empire, where the WAN of the time was the Roman roads during the Roman Republic, and it was 50,000 or so route miles, comparable to a pretty good WAN footprint right now. And the services that were there were, of course, that was the information superhighway, because this was before SMS or email. So if you wanted to communicate with someone, you, shaved somebody's head and let it grow back. That was encryption. But seriously, the general notion of common pooled resources, stat muxed, servicing multiple customers, accessible over a network, that's not really new. And I think that in a way that's good, because it says that the model of cloud computing, rather than being at the peak of inflated expectations or being overhyped, is a proven business model from virtually every other domain that there is, right? When you rent a hotel room, take a taxi cab, even if you have the cloud model for money or capital, which is called a bank loan, where the resource pay per use fee is called the interest payment, that's a proven model. Second point up there, cost reduction is good, business agility is good, but there are actually dozens of other benefits. For example, customer experience enhancement, reliability, et cetera, that are also relevant. Economies of scale are therefore not the only key to cloud benefits, because, for example, things like dispersion are important for user experience. The CapEx versus OpEx argument is probably the most bizarre argument that I've heard, especially when modulated by the number of times it's repeated. Because for a startup or for two kids with their mom's credit card, they're not going to probably find $10 million to build a data center in their backyard. But for enterprises, whether you want to incur capital expenditure or operating expense is fundamentally a complex accounting and financial decision that's based on capital budgets, weighted average cost of capital, any preferential tax treatment, et cetera. And in fact, the CapEx versus OpEx discrepancy or difference was captured years ago via the operating lease, right? I can pay OpEx for a capital good like an enterprise array or a server or what have you. Rational decision makers would select the lowest cost option if there were any such thing as a rational decision maker. Unfortunately, it's sort of an accounting fiction or a fiction that we all hold. We're all subject to a variety of cognitive biases and heuristics, and so as 4 decades or so of research in behavioral economics and psychology have shown, decision making is much more complex, and it's a mixture of both the rational and the irrational. Scale economies, therefore, won't lead to consolidation to a handful of providers, and you can go industry by industry or SIC code by SIC code and look at other comparable pay-per-use business models. Obviously, there's more than 4 or 5 hotel chains, there's more than 4 or 5 retailers, et cetera. And so what you actually get when you look at consolidation numbers via industries that are comparable to cloud from the perspective of pay-per-use on-demand resources, and by the way, telecommunications is another good example of that, is that there are thousands, if not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of providers. Now that said, you do find sort of a long tail with a heavy concentration at the high end. So yes, Marriott is big and Hilton is big, and yes, Avis and Hertz are big, but in addition to that, you have lots of small providers, right? For every Walmart that has 30 or 40% of the total global market, let's say for retail services, which is just another cloud and literally content distribution service, you have lots of fruit stands, et cetera, that are competing based on other factors besides scale. So I'm going to talk more about Big Switch and IT doesn't matter. The cloud computing costs going down, reducing IT spend is a fantastic argument that unfortunately misses the most fundamental principle of economics, which is price elasticity of demand. In the case of cloud computing or computing in general, it's a general purpose technology. That means I can use it to substitute for other capabilities. Would you like a photo? I know I'm not getting the right angle for you. Okay. And so, of course, when price comes down, spend goes up. If you don't believe me, consider, instead of cloud computing, something we'll call cloud cellular telephony, which got its start in 1980. And at the time, of course, the Motorola Dynatac was $4,000 or so. And if you look at the price decrease for handsets as well as base stations, they've come down in price for comparable functionality by an order of 100 or 1,000. And in that time, the spend on global mobility or enterprise mobility or any other segment you'd like to look at, instead of going down, has gone up. It's gone from 0 to well over $1 trillion. So price decreases for general purpose technologies lead to spend increases, and I believe cloud computing will help drive that. I'm going to talk about electricity consumption and security to some extent, so let me just move on. So the problem that we all face, both in telecommunications as well as in the sort of cloud computing and IT portions of the business, might be called the pizza problem. And the pizza problem is, when was the last time you went to a pizza parlor and you said, hey, great pizza, my compliments to the electric utility? You just don't do that. And in the online world, of course, how often have you gone to pizza.com and said, great website, my compliments to the underlying broadband, wireline or wireless infrastructure? So the challenge is IT networking and cloud computing by extension mere plumbing, or can it create strategic value? Nick Carr said, he argued in his book, Does IT Matter, and his Harvard Business Review article by the same name, he argued, look, IT has become ubiquitous, and anything that's ubiquitous becomes a commodity, and a commodity can create strategic advantage. So that's a pretty hard argument to argue with. unless you start thinking about things and looking at the data. And to make things more complex, this is some recent information from my friend Will Forrest over at McKinsey. And what he showed is they did an analysis based on Gartner and McKinsey Global Institute data and came up with this analysis that basically said if you look by industry, there's a minor correlation between IT spend as a percentage of revenues and profitability. Now, at first, I have to say that this chart scared me because it really says that there is not that much correlation. But if you think about it, I'm not sure that this has exactly the right data that you want to consider. Because, of course, industry by industry, profitability is a function of many different characteristics. Michael Porter taught us all about, power of buyers, industry rivalry, threat of substitutes, and determining industry profitability. And in addition to that, IT spend is a measure of some inherent characteristic of the industry. You would expect, let's say, healthcare to be much more intensive, or airlines in terms of reservation systems, crew scheduling, et cetera, to be more IT intensive than some other industries like fruit stands that are just basically about handing people fruit and then taking their dollar bills from them. So I think some useful data that helps complement this comes from Eric Brynjolfsson at MIT, and they did an interesting analysis that basically looked at data-driven decision-making and showed a statistically significant correlation between data intensity and big data and analytics and industry profitability. Moreover, there's a higher-level argument, which is consider this picture. Does anyone know what this is a picture of? This is Google in 1993, when it was just a few servers on Lego blocks in Sergey and Larry's dorm room. Now, think about the Google case for a second. Here is a company, it's 1993, you're two kids with an idea, and now you've got a $200 billion plus market cap, 40 billion plus in revenues, extremely high margins. How did they get there? It wasn't brand, because they had no brand. It was the back rub project before Google was even named. They had no preferential access to resources. They were just basically searching and crawling the World Wide Web, which anyone could do at that time, right? They didn't own the only gold mine in town. No preferential access to capital. Basically nothing except a better algorithm that they were able to deploy and then bring it up to scale, make it cost effective. So it was, in other words, excellence in IT, both algorithmically and in terms of operations at scale, that led Google to the kind of industry position that it has right now. So I would say that in Karl Popper's terms, this is the counterexample that falsifies the hypothesis that IT doesn't matter. So to move along from that, there's some great data from Sunil Mithas at the University of Maryland, and the key number there is the 1.92 on top, which basically shows that you double your money with IT. Right? So in other words, for every dollar that you invest, you get back almost $2. And this is, converting CapEx to the net present value of the incremental revenue stream, ensuring statistical significance and causality to the extent that you can in these kinds of studies. And moreover, not that I have anything against marketing or R&D, which are great, but it shows that an investment in IT actually returns more. So when we want to think about IT, I think that data shows that it really can provide both in terms of sort of these larger scale statistically significant studies, as well as in terms of individual case studies, some good cases. But what about cloud computing? First of all, what I would say about cloud computing is, and this is a model from Joe Pine and Gilmore, that basically says that you can move up the value chain from commodities to products to services to experiences. And think about, in effect, the difference between, for coffee grounds, growing coffee beans, packaging coffee, offering services like a Starbucks, and then having like a $20 sit-down experience at a fancy cafe, right? You're basically taking 3 cents of beans and converting it into a $20 experience. And on top of that, you can add in individual transformations like education or surgery, and I would even add to that something that's not in their original framework, which is societal transformation. And actually, I would argue that the cloud can play a role all through this, up through and including societal transformation. And you can think about cloud-based services like Twitter and Facebook and their role in the Arab Spring, or in today's American politics, the importance of Twitter in terms of getting out the vote, et cetera. So these are actual critical and beyond more than just making a few extra bucks. But there's nothing wrong with making a few bucks. So thinking about the strategic value of the cloud, I use this framework from Tracy and Wiersema called the Value Discipline Framework, which is in their book and also their Harvard Business Review article. And what they argue is that you can excel and achieve strategic competitive differentiation either by greater operational excellence, in other words, better processes, what they call product leadership, better services or products, customer intimacy, better, deeper customer relationships, and to their framework, I'd add one more, which is the opportunity for accelerated innovation. This has nothing to do with the cloud per se. These are all strategies or families of strategies that companies can use to excel and win in their chosen markets. What does it mean for the cloud? Good question. From an operational excellence perspective, I would argue that if you have something like a package delivery logistics firm, and what you're doing is you're running, field support trucks, your UPS, you've got, customer deliveries, you're doing whatever it is, being able to track those trucks, through 3G, 4G mobile gateways, et cetera, coupled with GPS, perhaps, and then tie that in with real-time traffic data and use it to optimize resources, things like reduced fuel consumption, et cetera, through optimal routes, minimizing left turns where you tend to have to wait, prioritizing platinum customers over gold and gold over bronze. Being able to do all that in real time means that you can achieve more with less and basically increase customer satisfaction while you're also reducing costs. So there's a case where the cloud plus big data plus mobility altogether can really enhance operational excellence. Another good example is product leadership. And if I think about the tablets or minis or smartphones that many of you have, they're great devices, they're fantastic, no question. But that said, they wouldn't be very much without the cloud services behind them. And that's everything from app stores to things like Siri, where your voice is captured locally but processed in the cloud, or even things like social network applications and other functions that I can get only through cloud-centric type of business models and architectures. But it isn't just high-tech products like tablets. Another good example is sneakers. If you take Nike Fuel Band, where I can take my races as I run them, take the exact routes, feed them up into the cloud, tie it into my social network, do personal bests, et cetera, there's a case where a particular brand was able to differentiate itself through cloud-centric capabilities. And I would add things like GM OnStar to that. Another good example is customer intimacy. Think about a Netflix and Amazon.com or a Pandora that basically takes data not just from an individual user, but taking all of those in aggregate and basically understanding patterns of use and then being able to recommend movies to you. What does that do and why is it valuable to them? It's critical because the better that they can recommend good movies to you, that increases the value of their service, increases the chance that you will stay with them, and therefore reduces customer churn and maximizes customer lifetime value. So all of those are good in terms of customer intimacy. And another cloud-centric case is accelerated innovation. Companies like Innocentive.com or Edison Nation that basically can take not just internal innovation within a company's few dozen, few hundred, or few thousand R&D personnel, but open up problems to the entire world. And through sort of an IP matching process, link up problems with those best able to solve them. That really couldn't happen without the cloud. And by the cloud in this case, I don't just mean EC2 or S3. I'm talking about these larger scale dispersed business models. So those are all good cases. And as far as electricity consumption being too high, I'm not sure what that's in comparison with, because if I run a cloud-enabled video conferencing session, I can eliminate, Cisco data has shown, a metric ton of jet fuel per meeting. So in other words, it's worth it to spend a few dollars for electricity within the data center to help reduce, thousands of dollars in spend, not to mention all of the carbon footprint that goes with that. And another case is optimization, the case that I mentioned, where being able to spend a few pennies in the data center enables me to save thousands of dollars or what have you within operations costs like fuel and labor and secondary things like the number of accidents goes down because my route miles are decreased. As far as the jobs case, I did a post on this a few weeks ago. There's this theory that data centers are so highly automated that they only have dozens of jobs, and therefore sort of implicit in that argument is, why don't we just get rid of them because they don't really mean anything to jobs which are important to the economy. Of course, what that's missing is, as the economy becomes more digital, and you see this ramp up everywhere in e-tailing and healthcare, et cetera, those data centers ultimately are enabling jobs and competitiveness, and so there's a multiplier effect. So for example, to take Google again, Google might only employ 1,000 or so employees within their data centers, maybe it's 2,000, but that in turn enables 50,000 people to have jobs. And then there's a 5-fold multiplier effect, studies have shown, where every job that they have, those people go out and spend money, and there's sort of a marginal income and a long tail effect that makes it all work together. Another example is of where the cloud can help out. I'm going to go back to product lifecycle theory. So there's the theory that basically, as I introduce new products, be they fax machines or tablets or color TVs, I sort of have this industry revenue ramp. Starts low with the product introduction, then it grows, it matures, and typically declines, although sometimes I have a plateau or I can renovate and start increasing revenues again. Coupled with that, of course, as a business looks attractive, rivals pour in. So if you look at the number of rivals, it grows exponentially until there's crowding and some drop out. If I keep going, though, to look at profitability, up front what I have is this dip in profitability where I'm investing in R&D, and then cumulatively I start to increase, and then I have a period of high profitability, and then that starts to tail off as the rivals come in and I've got price competition, and so the profitability declines. But what this disguises is the fact that while that may be average industry profitability over time, I actually have a dispersion. There's the first mover that's there in green, and then there's the laggards that show up in red that make up that average. Now, the reason the cloud is important, and the important thing to think about this financially is, if I can have first mover advantage, I have lower cost structure because I'm spending less time in development and not fighting over now people with those skills like app developers or what have you. Secondly, I have lower marketing costs because as the first entrant, I get my own publicity. Thirdly, I get to take advantage of that higher profit because I'm earlier in the life cycle, and there's probably a second order effect around time value of money. So the cloud helps because platform as a service, especially for digital businesses, but even for any business where I have an IT component to it, if I'm running the new Dreamliner and I've got to have the IT systems behind that, or I've got a new offer in the market that has some IT behind it, platform as a service capabilities that the cloud offers help me compress that product introduction cycle and achieve that first mover advantage. And then as far as time to volume, infrastructure as a service lets me continue to scale. So what I did is, there's the NIST definition of cloud. I have my own definition, common location independent online utility on demand. And in other words, common pooled resources that are location independent. Doesn't matter where I am, it doesn't matter where the services are delivered from. It's online, in other words, the network is critically important. It's a utility, what we might call a linear tariff or measured service. Cloud industry calls pay per use, and it's an on-demand service. In other words, I have resources when I need them. There's some math behind all of those, so besides forming a handy acronym that spells cloud for those of you that are not native English speakers. There's actually very quantifiable numbers behind that that you can use to assess the cost advantage. So I'll just cover a few of them really quickly. One of them is the statistical multiplexing benefit, and the stat muxing benefit basically has to do with when I have a peaky or spiky demand. A great example of this is NBC Olympics with a huge spike for 2 weeks. Other than that, nobody ever goes to that site. So if I'm building to peak, I have a lot of unused resources and very low average utilization across that 2 or 4 year planning cycle for the Olympics, because of course the Olympics are only on for 2 weeks out of that. So no matter what amount of virtualization I do, it's not going to help me because the peak to average cycle is key. It will compress the total number of resources if I virtualize perhaps, but not change the average utilization of whatever resources I have. So the only way to achieve that is through a service provider doing stat muxing, and there's a 1/√M effect in a penalty function that also benefits in terms of utilization. And the way to think about it is if I'm NBC, then I get that huge, I have got that huge peak I've got to have with unutilized resources, whereas if I'm stat muxing all of those demands, as you know, the more independent demands that I stat mux, the flatter demand I have, and therefore the better utilization. So that effect is easy to quantify. It's 1/√N. And basically what this argues is that I don't have to be very large in terms of the number of service providers that I have, or the number of independent workloads that I mux to be able to gain some compelling advantages. So what it says is, yes, it's great to be a very large provider, but actually even mid-sized providers can achieve pretty good economies of scale that are very close to the cost structure of others. The user experience is critically important, and it's been quantified. A couple of other speakers have alluded to this, but there's great data out there that says that the faster I can interact with customers, I get fewer bounces, more page views, more click-throughs, more revenue, et cetera. And so as applications become both more latency sensitive and more bandwidth intensive, it's important to reduce that latency. Now, one way to do it is through parallelization, to the extent that Amdahl's law will let me reduce the total response time within the server based on increasing the number of servers or cores or what have you. But then when I get into a network context, of course, I've got to address network response time as well as the response time in the server. And so what all that implies in turn is that there is an economic optimum. I'm obviously speeding through this due to the lack of time, but what it says is dispersion can be very important up front, and then parallelization becomes important. It all depends on the relative proportion of application time versus network time. So if you take a Google, where running a query on a single server might have taken, let's say, half an hour or an hour, by running it on 1,000 servers in parallel, because it's an embarrassingly parallel task, I can reduce that time. But then as I start getting into tens of milliseconds, network latency is important. I've got to distribute out those services to a global footprint of data centers. I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to say that there are some advantages to hybrids, and those hybrids in turn mean that there are lots of cool network requirements that are much more than just core internet services. Fiber channel has a role. And Todd Bundy over at Adva Optical gave me some interesting data there showing how important actually fiber channel still is, but MPLS, VPLS, DWDM, OTN, SDN, pick whatever acronyms you want. The point is that the flexibility, class of service, increased bandwidth, route diversity, optimized routing, anycast routing to the nearest server, being able to tie together network insight by exposing that network characteristics through an API, providing greater visibility as well as control. Some of the stuff that Lou Tucker is working on through the quantum effort is absolutely essential to the right distributed architecture in creating these hybrids. So I'm out of time. I'll just close by saying the cloud is inherently network-enabled, network-centric capability. I think that it has lots of different use cases ranging from social networking to multi-device or cross-device synchronization to checkpoints and choke points, for example, using the cloud for anti-DDoS. And it's a very rich field that offers a lot of opportunity. I don't believe that the cloud will take over all of IT any more than we all live in hotels or all eat in restaurants, but it's obviously a critically important technology and business model that is extremely relevant to us. Hopefully I've helped to debunk some of the memes that are out there that are maybe a little bit overdone and give you some food for thought. So with that, we probably have time for one question, and then I'll stick around for a couple of minutes if anyone wants to ask me anything one-on-one. Any questions from anyone? Okay, I know you have one question, which is, oh, there is a question. Of course, it had to be at the farthest point, demonstrating the importance of latency.
I think, thank you very much for your nice presentation. Your cost-benefit analysis must be based on some assumption, right? And what are some of the conditions under which the benefits might be lower than the costs of adopting cloud?
So thank you for asking that. Now, sir, we've never met, is that right? So these are the equations, and the answer is you can make assumptions either that the unit cost of a cloud resource is higher, the same, or lower, and you can also make assumptions regarding the peak to average ratio. And so that P&A is peak and average, and then I've got utility premiums, et cetera, in there. In plain English, though, it's very simple, which is all other things being equal, like security and so forth, then if cloud services cost less than an enterprise do-it-yourself unit cost, then of course you'd want to use the cloud. If you can buy the same peach for 50 cents versus $1, you may as well get it for 50 cents. Now, interestingly, if cloud services cost more than enterprise IT, some people have concluded that you shouldn't use it, but the correct conclusion is not to jump to conclusions because it's perfectly reasonable to pay a higher unit cost for a shorter period of time. The average cost to own a mid-sized, mid-market sedan is probably $10 a day, and yet we happily pay Avis or Hertz $40 or $50 a day because the salient point is not the $50 a day versus the $10 a day. The salient point is paying $50 for 2 days versus having to buy a car for $30,000. So the true value of cloud services is in the no commit pay per use, not necessarily in a unit cost advantage. So where you come out, relative to another provider depends on your own costs, the other provider, and of course things like network costs, including are there bandwidth, transfer costs or what have you. So with that, I think we're out of time. I'll just ask one more question, which is where is lunch? And the answer is I think it's that way. So thank you very much, and I think we're taking a lunch break.
Cloud services present some interesting and unique challenges to both cloud and network service providers. Today, the vast majority of cloud workloads are delivered over the public internet, and while that's appropriate for certain types of work, such as test and dev, it does not meet the security or the performance requirements for most corporate IT users. On the network side, it also tends to be the lowest margin product that a network delivers. In order to deliver the sorts of security and performance requirements that they need, what you need to do is attach the private WAN environment to the public or private cloud environment sitting in the data center. This has a dual benefit. It meets the corporate requirements as well as allowing the network service provider to sell a higher margin product. To that end, what we've seen are private NNIs being set up between network service providers, both parties joining things such as our Ethernet exchange in order to efficiently aggregate access to one another, as well as joining our Internet exchange in order to have access to the optimal Internet routes for those workloads appropriate for the Internet environment.
Good afternoon. I'm Petrop Wilton. I'm the editor of Communications Day. I'm speaking here at PTC'13 with Minoru Ito. He's the MD of Research and Development for NTT Docomo in Japan. Thank you so much for joining us today, Minoru.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me this time.
We've been chatting a little bit about some of the threats facing mobile operators. And I guess the first thing we were chatting about was Wi-Fi. Now, Informa Telecoms and Media, I think, in their 2013 predictions, suggested that some mobile operators might start leaning away from Wi-Fi offload for fear of maybe damaging their own business models. What's your take on this?
Since our customers are paying kind of flat rate subscriptions up to 7 gigabytes per month, then I think Wi-Fi offloading is good for us, not for our business. Reduction of our pricings.
Okay, so I guess in that case, Wi-Fi offload can actually help operators like NTT Docomo deal with the increasingly large demands on mobile data. But what other strategies are you guys using to try and kind of cope with some of that demand?
Good questions. Yeah, we just started Wi-Fi offloading. It's so behind from Korea or US and Europe. Since our customers are using long commuting time from home to their offices, then they are always required to connect it to cellular networks, not Wi-Fi.
Sure.
Then, less than 5 years, we are spending time for providing good cellular connections, not attending so much focus on Wi-Fi. That's our histories. Then, but after the emergence of smartphones, so we just started Wi-Fi offloading at the downtown.
What's the quality of public Wi-Fi like in Japan currently?
So far, disaster. Someone said Wi-Fi efficiency is about lower than 50% due to the interference of Wi-Fi channels and contamination of some spectrums. So Wi-Fi offloading is that so far doesn't work so well at downtown Tokyo or Osaka or Nagoya in the urban areas.
Ouch.
So far.
Okay, so in that case, what about, for example, the use of small cells, micro base stations to help deal with some of the load?
So yeah, that's good questions. Thus we are now focusing on new cellular systems in addition to LTEs. So in 3-year or 4-year time horizons, we plan to introduce LTE Advanced that has macro cell and a very small cell overlay network.
Okay, yep. All right. Now, is that going to be enough? I guess you've got the additional spectral efficiency of LTE-A, and of course you've got more base stations if you're using microcells. Do you think that combination will be enough to keep up with what is a very strong rise in demand for mobile data?
Only God knows. Only God knows. But at least I can say this time that is more than better than Wi-Fi offloading.
Okay.
So fully controlled by operators by adding very small cells on the top of macro cell. That is, I guess, technology-wise, it's much better than Wi-Fi solutions so far.
Okay. And one other thing I've heard about recently is maybe using commercial strategies to help manage some of that demand. For example, charging a premium for a higher quality of service, or maybe a slight bump for LTE, a slight bump for LTE-A. Is Docomo exploring these avenues?
So last year we introduced usage-based subscription models.
Okay.
Before that, we were just offering flat rate services. Sure. But last year we introduced 7 gigabyte limitations. Then if you exceed 7 gigabytes per month, then you have to pay more. That's has been very helpful to decrease our huge packet consumptions of our customers.
Yeah, and I think it's being explored in now most countries in the world. Okay, let's look at another challenge that is often kind of kicked around as being one that's facing both mobile and fixed operators. The threat from over-the-top or OTT services, for example IPTV or even over-the-top voice. What's your take on that?
Oh, okay, I see. Have you ever heard a line? Lines of over-the-top voice-over services that was originated in Japan, and they have more than 100 billion subscribers.
Wow.
More than 100 billion subscribers. So that business is very successful, and then it's not inevitable to compete against those over-the-top businesses.
Okay.
Then, yeah, we have to collaborate with them. No way to compete against good over-the-top businesses.
Sure,
So-
that makes sense. So there's an element, if you can't beat them, join them. Do you think that established carriers have any inherent advantages, though, in competing where they need to against the OTT players?
Yeah, good questions. One huge difference from over-the-top players, which we have, is that we have tens of thousands of real shops, our representative shops that has a physical or real direct contact to our customers. Then by using that contacts, we can sell our own products. That is more friendly to our customers, say some e-commerce or insurance or content delivery systems. That's our strategies.
Sure. And I guess finally, Japan has long been recognised as a leader in communications tech on many fronts. Can you give us any clues about what we should look out for from NTT Docomo in the year ahead? Any kind of particular innovations that you're working on? Any hints you can give us?
Okay, two aspects. One is advancement of not Wi-Fi, cellular connections.
Sure.
We plan to introduce LTE Advanced in 3-year or 4-year time horizons. That definitely brings us a huge advantage in terms of wireless broadband connections.
Yeah.
That is one aspect. The second aspect is in Japan, ARPU, regarding ARPUs, data ARPU is more than 60%. So we are looking for more smart ARPU in addition to data ARPU.
Sure.
Smart ARPU means ARPU from a service or some value-added stuff.
Yeah.
So two aspects we have.
Okay, we'll keep an eye out. Ito-san, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed Tuesday's keynotes, executive insight roundtables, topical sessions, and Tuesday evening reception, sponsored by PTC'13 Diamond sponsor Tata Communications. Join us on Wednesday for the last of the executive insight roundtables and keynotes. PTC also invites all full, network, and Wednesday-only registrants to attend the closing lunch and award ceremony. PTC'13 is made possible in part by the generosity of the PTC'13 sponsors. Mahalo to each of the PTC'13 bronze sponsors. Thank you for all of your support.
As a wholesale telecom carrier, you need to keep a tight control on costs without ever sacrificing quality. Introducing RimHub, the best partner to outsource your wholesale carrier functions with guaranteed cost savings and better customer experience. RimHub is guided by K. Paul Singh, co-founder, ex-chairman, and CEO of Primus Telecom, who built a profitable global wholesale business at Primus. RimHub's best-in-class service portfolio includes managed network provisioning, and cost of sales management. Our NOC, staffed with IP and TDM engineers, monitors and troubleshoots network issues for global carriers. Our network specialists are experts in provisioning voice and data circuits for carriers. Our telco auditors ensure you pay only for what you contracted. So why use RimHub? Achieve material cost savings, enhance operational flexibility, deliver a better customer experience. Contact us for a no-obligation assessment today, plus win an iPad mini.
Looking for in-depth coverage of the day's sessions? Read the Comms Day Daily, brought to you by Comms Day, the official PTC'13 media partner. The special PTC'13 edition of the Comms Day Daily will be delivered to your email inbox tonight. The daily will also be available on the PTC'13 website at ptc.org/PTC'13. Thanks for watching PTC TV. Be sure to join us tomorrow. Until then, aloha.